How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Shebeen. I'm Barry Chandler. Sunday night. We're going to have some crack tonight. Hope you're all well. Wherever you're joining us from, I'd love to know what's in your glass, what are you drinking, what the crack is. We've got folks joining us from all over the United States. I can see already in the comments. And further afield, Nova Scotia, North Dakota, Cape Cod, Jacksonville, Florida. You're all very welcome to the Shebeen. We're going to be joined this evening by a good friend of ours, Fionnán O'Connor, whiskey historian and good friend to Stories and Sips, a good friend to Irish whiskey fans of America, and good friend to many in the world of Irish whiskey. Fionnán is taking on the role of co-host / guest tonight, and our lovely Lauren McMullen is sitting at home tuning in and watching tonight instead of co-hosting. So we'll miss Lauren tonight, but Lauren will be back next week. So thanks, Lauren, for all her co-hosting up until this week. She can take a break tonight, hopefully enjoy whiskey as she's watching. And I'd love to know what whiskey you're drinking. I've got a whiskey to hand here. I've got a Bushmills 1995 Malaga cask, one of my favorites when it was first released, one of the early Causeway releases. And looking forward to having a wee drop of that this evening. I've also got a drop of the whiskey that Fionnán O'Connor is going to talk about this evening. I've got a small drop of this that I'll be sampling on its way to full maturation. Fionnán will share all the details of that when he joins us from the west coast of the United States, joins us from San Francisco this evening. So you're all very welcome. What else are we going to talk about tonight? Well, we're going to cover all the big news that Fionnán has around his second book and the companion whiskey and all those details as well. And we'll take any questions you have as we go. It was a busy week in the world of whiskey over the past week. There was a lot of chatter, a lot of discussion around the announcement of new Middleton Very Rare, super hyper premium release, Middleton Very Rare Forêt de Tronchet, a €5,000 or $5,000 Middleton Very Rare, which we had the chance to taste during the week. And I'll be sharing details of behind the scenes of the journey of that whiskey during the week, because I got a chance to visit the cooperage in France during the week that makes these T5 casks that are up there with Mizunara casks as the most expensive in the world. They're very rare. They're very hard to get your hands on. Middleton only got 5 of them. And I went behind the scenes of the cooperage, had a chance to understand and learn more about why this whiskey, or how this whiskey comes to be such a premium product, and talk about the challenges, the pros and cons of whiskey pricing. We're going to talk about that during the week, and we'll revisit that next week in the Shebeen as well. If you have any questions on that, you can ask me about that as well. But I'll share lots of those details with you as well as we go during the week. All right, what else have you got going on here in the comments? Greg is starting with Egan's Single Malt 2015 Legacy. Good man. Let me see. What else have we got? Ted from DC is in the chat as well. How are you, Ted? Richard's got a lot of powers. Good man. A lot of power and a lot of powers. That's what we all want. Kevin's in Austin, Texas. Good man, Kevin. Good to see you. Mark McKenzie's got powers right in the glass. Brian Faulkner's got, he's saying aloha to us from Oakland. Great stuff. Hi to Lauren there. Amy's in Arizona, starting with Jameson Black Barrel. Dee's got powers, John's Lane. Johnny's got, he's sipping on 3 swallows. Weeg has got Redbreast in the Bronx. All right. Tyrone's joining us from Nova Scotia. Richard from Dallas. Nap Oak 14 in the glass. I almost picked up bottle Nap Oak 12 cask strength. I might grab it later, see how the crack goes, and sip on that tonight. Bob is joining us from Milford, Massachusetts, opening the evening with a dram of Blue Spot, followed by W.D. O'Connell Single Pot Still 5-year cask strength. Excellent. Slauncha Bob. W.D. O'Connell Single Pot Still 5-year-olds, by the way, are going to make an appearance very shortly in the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. We're waiting on labels for those for our next release from W.D. O'Connell, and I'll share more details of that with you as I have them. Fionnán is almost ready in the back end there. We're going to have him join us in maybe 2 or 3 minutes and chat about his big news and what's going on in the world of Irish whiskey history and all the interesting things going on in Fionnán's life. Before we do that, just a bit of background. I first came across Fionnán when I got into the world of whiskey back in 2016, and by that stage, Fionnán was well on his way to whiskey history stardom. And I came across his first book, A Glass Apart. And it was my introduction really to single pot still whiskey. And we'll talk a little bit about that with Fionnán when he comes on. And anyone who has ever had the pleasure of spending time with Fionnán will leave his company more knowledgeable, more entertained, and richer for it. And I'm delighted that we'll get to chat with him tonight, but an absolute oracle of knowledge and somebody who has had a massive impact on the most recent time period in the world of Irish whiskey, as many independent distilleries have leaned on Fionnán's research and the work that he has done in uncovering vintage mash bills of old. And many of the whiskies you'll taste today, tomorrow, and certainly in the next 5 or 10 years will have been informed by the research and the history sleuth work that Fionnán has done along the way. So we're all going to be better off for the passion and the work that Fionnán has put in. So I'm delighted that we're seeing more fruits of his labor in the form of what he'll announce and share with us this evening. So we were lucky enough in August to be joined by Fionnán for a tasting in the Palace Bar, where we had a poitín tasting, not a whiskey tasting, but a poitín tasting. And it was an absolute, it was a masterclass in distillation history and in that forerunner to what we would call whiskey today, and understanding all of the interconnectivities that happened to give us the spirits that we have today. And that's what's fascinating about the history of Irish whiskey, is everything that had to happen up until today, most of it unplanned. And we'll learn more about that with Fionnán. So let me just give a final check to the comments, and we'll bring Fionnán in. All right. Evening all. All right. So look, put your comments in there. We'll get to all of them as we go through. If you have any questions for Fionnán, stick them in the comments. We will have another event with Fionnán on Wednesday night in our Stories and Sips Club for our members. We have a Meet the Maker event, because Fionnán is now a whiskey maker, in addition to an author, with his most recent with this announcement tonight. And so we're going to dive into the history of distillation with Fionnán. You'll get a chance to ask questions directly of him. Turn on your video, turn on your microphone, talk to Fionnán on Wednesday night. If you're a member of the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, you can save your seat. Just go to storiesandsIps.com. You'll find the link there. You got an email today with the registration link to it as well. So looking forward to diving even deeper into the history of distillation on Wednesday. So without further ado, let's bring in the main man himself. Fionnán O'Connor, how are you?
Grand.
Yeah. That was a massive introduction, but for a massive presence in the world of Irish whiskey. Like, you've had an outsized impact, whether you like it or not, in the most recent years of distillation, haven't you?
Oh yeah, massive, enormous. People tell me they've never seen any influence so massive. Gotta, but that's overly kind of you.
Fionnán will downplay every compliment we throw at him now for the night and throw it back at us. Where are you joining us from? You're not in the gloomy Irish weather at the moment.
No, I'm at my brother's house in High Brassel, out in the far western parts of the known world. At home in Spain. This is the first time I've been able to log on, and it hasn't been like the middle of the night, so I could get used to this. Being on the time zone of the audience is refreshing. But no, I'm out west. My brother.
Very good. Very good. I would like to. I know you've got a lot of news to share and exciting there's exciting activities happening over the next 3, 4, 5 years around the whiskey, around this project. Before we get into it, I'd love to take a few minutes to get our audience up to the point where this book starts, because there's a lot happens before that. I'd love to maybe start at the first book and understand how it came to be that you became the author of what is still today the most referred to book and the most trusted book on single pots of whiskey in Ireland. Could you give us a quick overview on how it came to be that you wrote that book and decided that the world needed that book?
Yeah, I suppose. Funnily enough, I was here when I put the first words down. I went to college in California, and I was working for Diageo at the time as a student job. At a certain age. But anyway, I was working as a kind of and I was 21 at the time. For the record, if anyone's watching, do you hear that story? But anyway, I was out here, and I remember Irish whiskey then was at a very kind of different place than it is now. Absolutely. I remember I'd go into off licenses in America, and there would be like 3 things, and Redbreast was there among the blends, and then like Blackbush would be up with the malts, and nothing was where it was supposed to be. And it's very difficult to find the stuff for starters, and certainly like again at that time I was doing like medieval lit, and definitely that was the trajectory I was on. Whiskey was already a kind of a passion, but I saw myself wearing the padded jacket and writing about like medieval hell narratives, and it drove me to drink, and through this strange set of circumstances, I was working as a student. I met the Master of Whiskey. Diageo used to have this Master of Whiskies program. Have I frozen?
No, you're all good.
Okay, grand. Here I am in like the middle of the tech industry, and the computer has the audacity to freeze.
The coins in the meter, no?
Yeah, the jukebox runs on little tokens you get given by the overlords. But anyway, I was already massively into whiskey, and I started. I met so Diageo used to have this Masters of Whiskey thing. They had head brand ambassadors across the portfolio was the kind of logic. And the Master of Whiskey for the West Coast, a guy named Steve Beale. I met him in a bar, and he said, look, Bushmill's our biggest budget at the moment. Would you like a job? And that was it. And I started going to all these whiskey fairs and things, and suddenly everything was free. Which, as anyone who has ever worked as a brand ambassador can tell you, you're suddenly in the space where all the gargle costs nothing, and you're allowed to try what you want. I'm certainly on a student budget. That was a big thing for me. And then through this weird mix of circumstances, there's a guy, Brian Sheehy, in San Francisco, who owns a number of kind of high-end cocktail bars. The flagship one for many years was Bourbon and Branch. And I started kind of working there, doing kind of whiskey talks. And then I managed to convince the college, they had this system of student-taught classes for, a course was worth either 4 units or 5 units of credit, depending on how rigorous it was. But you could teach a 1-unit course as a student if you could get a professor to sponsor you. And they would pop in and kind of make sure. And it was a way of kind of grooming kids for post-grad. And they'd often be on these like fun topics like, philosophy and the Matrix or whatever, and I managed to convince, well, it didn't take a lot of convincing. I got a professor of Celtic studies to sponsor a history, culture and appreciation of whiskey course, which myself and a Scottish friend of mine, David Miller, taught together. And we were at our height the second most popular student-taught class on campus, the first being sexual exploration. But we came in a respectable second to that. Anyway, obviously when you're, being grilled about something, you want to not look like a fool. And so I always had a, coming from a kind of a history background, I had a good kind of instinct for fact retention, and this may never have come across, but I quite like trivia. Anyway, so I just and there was only so much resources out there at the time. Again, my main connection back to Dublin would have been the Irish Whiskey Society Forum, which is long gone. And people I knew more over the internet than I knew face to face that are now like bosom friends, Willie Murphy, people like that, anyway, this was all there. And I found myself, I have a certain kind of heartthrob for lost causes in general. And certainly pot still was a lost cause. And, I look back at a glass apart now, and it feels very different, partly because the industry has changed so much, but partly because I've changed, but certainly there was the young students' adoration of something that nobody knew about, that you wanted everyone to know about. People hit a certain age bracket, like 23 to 27. People are like 10 times more likely to just accost you with some pet topic they have, and like walk up to you in a bar or a grocery shop and tell things at you, and I was definitely of that, in the same way that like I would walk up to people and tell them about the Boethius or whatever like obscure medieval topic they didn't want to know about in a bar, and you get more tolerance for it, when you've been on the other side, because some people, dreadful bore. But anyway, I certainly took pot still as a cause, which in hindsight was a bold move, because there were only two of them, and there was Green Spot and there was Redbreast, and I used to bring Bourbon and Branch, like Brian Shee had me on roster to bring back Green Spot every time I went back to Ireland, to bring it back in briefcases. And it was still the kind of white screw cap bottles back then, because it wasn't in the US, so it was so different, And then my last year of undergrad, IDL came out with a single pot still range, and they doubled the number from 2 to 4 with John's Lane and Middleton Barry Crockett, and I came home originally to do a master's also in that kind of medieval lit kind of space. And I was off living in Florence for a brief bit in Italy, again following this medieval path. And then I was there writing about single pot still whiskey, and I thought, all right, this has to stop. I can't have like two lives, and I'll exercise this kind of pot still stuff out of me, and I'll take some time aside and I'll just do this. And I did. And then, like, I'm glad I finished it when I did, because suddenly Irish whiskey just started leaping forward. And if I hadn't, that book is full of stuff that is of no use to anyone, like Middleton single casks that were in Celtic Whiskey Shop in 2013, because that was all there was to write about. Now it's long gone. This whole and similarly, the book could never have been, at that time, it was possible to do a kind of a completist, look at something, because it was that and like dead bottlings. And a few people, Willie Murphy, John Marinan, Zoltan Vary, a few people in Dublin were very forthcoming with samples of old stuff and this and that. And then, on the far side of that, I found myself being kind of introduced as a whiskey writer. And, it was so odd, because Ireland hadn't had that space. We didn't have a Charles MacLean or a Dave Broom or Fred Minnick, and I felt kind of sheepish and stupid, kind of wearing those clothes. But I've gotten, I broke the ice after a while. And then it was an odd, I was kind of doing that stuff, and Irish whiskey was taking off. And then through this bizarre set of circumstances, Board Bia, for those who don't know, Board Bia is the Irish Food Board, literally means food board, sell a lot of shellfish to China. Chinese, cuisine has a lot of shellfish in it, and certain parts of China have polluted the water so heavily that Ireland has swooped in and started selling ourselves as this kind of like unspoiled Tiernan type island of crabs. And so I was sent on this like mollusk, ambassadorial delegation, and it was odd, because I was told, give a flight of Irish whiskey, and the only thing out there was Jameson, and so it felt kind of strange. And I was taken aside and told, look, you don't seem to understand what's going on here. Your job is to kind of get people a bit merry so they sign off on the clams, get back. And all right, now that we're understanding. Yes, the Tyrconnell Muscatel finish. You're all familiar with it. A single cask Celtic whiskey, but the other person then sent there to kind of prepare food with the Irish produce was a guy named Martin Muckanumra, who's now my thesis advisor. And Martin is a chef, but he's also a food historian. Dare I say it, he's not on here to hear it, but the food historian in Ireland, really. And one night he said, look, do you want to, skip town and we'll go explore Hong Kong? And went and ate at places where, chickens hanging from the roof, and had a great time. And then I woke up and I was signed up for a PhD. And he said, if you want to take this further, blah, blah, blah. So I ended up back in academia by accident. And then I kind of fell into that. And then now on the far side of that, that's coming to a swift end this Christmas. And it felt strange to kind of say goodbye to that, because that's become such a, and it began as a history of Irish mash bills, which is what it's usually presented as. But it became something different very, very fast, because it became about, material spirit. Mash bill was not a defensible concept when we were talking about the 1500s. The idea that anybody picked these things on purpose, and it became just about what is the spirit and how does it change, and mash bills come at the second half of the story. And certainly now that I'm deleting stuff from the thesis to kind of clean it up, we have a word count limit and this kind of stuff. And a lot of stuff came up, and I found a lot of the stuff I had thought was true was untrue. And again, one I often bring up is that the whole story about the malt tax and pot still turned out to be just not a fantasy. And other stuff, and and again, it makes me cognizant, because there was stuff I put in print in a glass apart that I now know is wrong, because I've had a long look at it. And certainly there can be, in all whiskey, including Irish whiskey, a kind of a gotchaism about people being wrong about stuff and this and that. And I've tried to avoid falling into that kind of stone throwing, because we've all been wrong before. And, we're on the the one road, and maybe the wrong road, etc. Anyway, that's the road.
What's the title, the official title of the thesis that you've been spending so much of your time dedicated to getting to this finish line? What will it prove or disprove, or you hope it'll educate people on?
The thesis is called "Still With Us." There's a lot of time put in and thought put into that bad pun. But the more I thought about it, the more "Still With Us" kind of felt at home in my head, and I wanted it to be. I think the first two people there's very few people in the Irish whiskey industry who have seen it, but the first two who have are John Quinn and Carol Quinn, and obviously, IDL were very forthcoming with the archival stuff, which was an enormous, boon. And so I've always felt it very much a duty thing to show Carol. And she was kind of a kindred spirit when they had me down for about 2 weeks looking through stuff, and certainly someone to spitball. And then John is just very, very good friends independently with my thesis advisor. Martin and him coach their daughters' GA teams or something together. Just through a pure, he knew I was getting student funding before I did, because Martin told him in a pub in Phibsborough. Anyway, so and
it's called "Still With Us."
Yeah, and so I remember giving it to them, and it was the first time I'd given it to industry. I have academic friends who've looked at it. And I felt a certain, and John was very encouraging, a certain sense of responsibility that it could provide a kind of, not that I'm the oracle of anything, but, have done a considerable amount of homework, and to provide in an accessible way, in any sense that academic writing can be accessible, but, a clear and in one place and footnoted with original sources, kind of, Thomas guide to that history, for people to go to and to find other things, find the primary sources, some of which are obviously in archives and a little hard to get a hold of it, and some of which are public domain, and anything in between. But to put it in one place, and I start to feel a certain kind of new attitude toward the project on that basis. And certainly when we did experiment with the blind panel and all that, and all those people from the industry participated, I felt an obligation back to them to just provide a document that would be of use,
And you've spent so many years now heads down on this, that this is second, third, fourth nature to you. But to those who have no idea, have not followed this journey, when you say put in one place, put everything in one place, what is it you mean? The history of Irish whiskey, the history of distillation? How would you summarize that?
Yeah, so I mean the history of material Irish spirit is the thrust of it. It literally starts at, in fact, starts slightly before the Red Book of Ossory, and continues, in terms of the roots of distillation in Europe, and even a little bit just in general, and grounding it in these primary sources. And a lot of it came as, like, I ended up spending a lot of time with A.V. O'Connor over at the Royal Irish Academy for all this, Gaelic medical literature, which we've talked about, that I had no idea existed until this happened. And I was shocked, because I'm suddenly privy to this thing that she knew all about, and that the whiskey world, myself included, no clue about, and like medical records from the 1400s of people gargling whiskey to cure paralysis of the tongue and all kinds of weird, and so it became more than what I had originally gone in for. And then certainly, it became about, the Mashbuilds is obviously the fiber of the whole thing. But they don't even come into the story, until halfway through,
Okay.
you're talking about the evolution. And to me, I didn't intend for it to be about poaching originally. And yet illicit whiskey, was so bound up with the story that it was impossible to talk about one without the other. You look at, again, the term Inishowen being used by, which came from illicit distilling, being used by people like Bushmills and Coleraine in legal whiskey and blah, 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 and these became imparsible. So it grew up into this, thing. And a thing I have trouble saying goodbye to at this point. It became so kind of close.
So much of Ireland's past has been documented, certainly in the last 20, 30 years, in more accessible formats online and through spoken word and interviews with those researchers who've explored various aspects of Irish social, cultural history. But whiskey, it doesn't seem, and you'll tell me if you found others or not, but it doesn't seem like there was as deep a dive into whiskey as what you have done over the past 5 years until you came along.
Yes. The world wasn't born until I was. It's stands to reason. I have no memory of the Earth existing before me. Can't have happened. But no, there hasn't been. Like there are. It's funny. They're out. So like this is a book here, Irish Peasant Society by K.H. Connell. Nobody in the whiskey world has the foggiest idea what this is. And yet there's a whole chapter on illicit distillation. And some great stuff. I mean, and it was all done with the National Folklore Collection. And you learn about like Red Willie, who was this spirit that was responsible for leading excise officers astray, leading them down into like bog holes and things. And you wished Red Willie on the gougers. And I read that, I thought of like literally Willie Murphy, popping up in the foggy moors of Donegal, and leading down the wrong path. But odd stuff, So but again, it's fallen down strange avenues that certainly there's certainly been a disconnect with and it's not just Irish whiskey, whiskey in general. Certainly whiskey books tend to cite other whiskey books. There's kind of a closed chamber of noise, and so you can see lines even repeat and this and that, and even like a glass apart, is in that space. But looking outside that, you get a few that are, especially the ones that are more historically orientated, that kind of go elsewhere to find their information. But there's certainly a loss of connection. And I think we've come a long way in Ireland. There certainly is less of the kind of spielcraft than there was. I would say like the high point for kind of irritation was somewhere between like 2005 and 2016, like when people were kind of getting into it. And funnily enough, a lot of the community has grown, and I think it can kind of smell it. I think there's and that's healthy. That's real. So I think
it's been very good timing, hasn't it? In the sense of, like you mentioned at the beginning, how the Irish whiskey world has changed so dramatically in the past 10 years. So 2013 was when Midleton refocused on single pot still whiskey. So in that 10-year period, now we have awards shows where Midleton may not pick up a single pot still award, but other distilleries might. And that's a very different landscape to the one you found yourself in. Where does your thesis fit in with what work is being done on the distillation side of things? And do you see it playing a role in how distillers are informed or how brands go to market? Does it have a role on the commercial side?
I mean, I feel I tried to keep it non-commercial from my end, and I think that gave it a lot of, in very cynical terms, authority in a strange, and I hate, I'm not authority of anything, but he gave it a kind of a clarity in the public discourse, and a lot of distillers kind of felt a kinship with that clarity and participated in the blind panel. We had 27 blenders and distillers in the room, and it meant they were all volunteering their time. I feel a great sense of debt to those people. But then similarly, like in the pub afterwards, I had loads of conversations with people saying, "Oh," and now we randomized what order people got things in. So they would say, "Oh, what was number 3? It had this," and I had no clue what they were talking about. But there was a kind of an energy there, and people have gone off and done their own things, and there has been that space, and certainly like 90% of the piece, literally 90,000 out of 100,000 words was earmarked for history, and then 10,000 is earmarked for the Boan experiments, the recreation, and the argument put forward. The Boan, long before I said it publicly, the Boan distillates were decimalized into this kind of 30-30-30 parameter, which then again John Quinn and now James Doherty after him in the IWA were very supportive in. They embraced it as their kind of put forward definition of pot still. The Irish Whiskey Guild the same. So I was very, but again, I think a lot of that had to do with not being a commercial entity, and trying, and it's just factually correct. It's just a question of like, if you want to see the proof, I can provide it, and there was that basis, and certainly that was a big encouragement. And so I feel a certain, without being arrogant, a certain kind of affection for the new, it's not all to do with me. There were people doing it. Peter Mulrine was doing stuff before I was doing the experiment, etc. Brendan, I hate to position myself in anything that I'm not, but there is an affection there for that new space, and they took the definition to a T, like literally up to 30%, but restricted oat sweetened rye, malted or unmalted. That that's. So I felt a great sense of debt. So the industry will carry on its own course, but
So
I think certainly that ties
you
to the modern.
There's something you touched on there that not everyone may be familiar with. So as part of your thesis, part of your research, you undertook distillation with Boan Distillery to recreate vintage mash bills that no longer fit the EU definition of what pot still whiskey could be. You wanted to do that to understand flavor profiles. You brought in a tasting panel of experts from across the world of Irish whiskey to give their feedback, their thoughts on the oats and the rye and the wheat and the contribution of all these pieces to these old mash bills. What did that work inform for you? What did that help you understand or achieve?
Everything. I mean, I remember we had these logs planned in case anything went. The first day, the engineering company that kitted Boan refused to take ownership. They said if any pipe bursts or anything goes wrong, we are not. Your plan doesn't cover this. Said, oh God, this is great. Pat Cooney will fucking have my head. Thankful. I remember the day 30% oats, the maximum amount of oats in the project went through the kit. And nothing went wrong, and I just breathed this enormous sigh of relief because we didn't know, but there was this sense of unknowingness. I remember walking into the boardroom. I was there for a month, and walking to the boardroom with Peter Cooney and all the Coonies, and nobody and the staff as well, and nobody knew what was going to happen when we changed. Their original mash bill was 50 malt, 50 raw barley. And then they changed it in the second control was 60 raw barley, 40 malt, which is, again, they were meant to be a mathematical even. And then, the industry standard, right? For one better word, the Middleton mash. So those two, and there was a strange difference there. And then when you added the 5% oats, and thinking, oh, wow. And then swallowing air when the 10% oats came in, and you're broken the sound barrier of the 5%. We're kind of strangers in a strange land. And I've this enormous amount of effort went into the logs, where every day I sat up with Michael Walsh and tried things. And it was supposed to be if something went wrong or this or that, can't use them in the thesis. It's just like a drinking session, and we would say like, oh, we haven't compared Mashbuild 2 to Mashbuild 7 after having had Mashbuild 3 yet, and when, but there was this, it certainly gave me a lot, and I think Mick feels similarly. Just our conversations there, learning for ourselves what oats were starting to taste like, and then what happened when you had wheat and oats in tandem, what happened when you threw in a bit of rye, and when you took away from raw barley or you gave to it. And it certainly created a kind of a, for want of a better word, a kind of a vocabulary of and obviously this is only through one kit, triple distilled, etc. And then, I started to extrapolate and see it on other kits. And, now I've had, similar stuff coming out of like Pierce Lyons Spirit or obviously Killowen or, other places, and start finding commonalities and this and that. But it certainly gave me just a breath of newfound, I don't know, lure replaced by wonder, replaced by what I hope is understanding, and sincerely hope is not just my own, fantasy.
And at the same time that you were doing this work, again, all of these things seem to be very timely, in the sense of the Irish Whiskey Association was revisiting the Irish Whiskey Technical File around the same time. And meanwhile, you're one of the few out there distilling in this wacky way that befits a previous generation, doesn't fit today, but is something that maybe is being petitioned for a new evolved technical file that governs Irish whiskey. Was your work, do you think, at that research stage, helpful towards that discussion on evolving the Irish Whiskey Technical File?
Oh, absolutely, but not through any fault of my own, just because there were a number of people on the technical committee who were sympathetic and, behind the scenes were very on board. And similarly, like, I think there was a lot of stone throwing that went on around the technical file about who's to gain and who's at fault and this and that. And I always tried to keep the research kind of clean of that and just say, look, this needs to be changed because it's just not true. It's not correct, and that's it. At the end of the day, 80s redbreast, if the truth were known, does not count, and something needs to be done about this. And it certainly created another voice in the room, about how it was thought. And I remember John Quinn calling me when it was going on, when the discussions were happening, and he said, look, I want to know as much about the history of pot still as anybody in the room. Please tell me everything. And and there was a definite, and similarly, like IDL coming on board, in the thesis was certainly for me a change of, I think there was a certain apprehension across all players about who had what intentions and this and that. And you felt, or I felt, a certain kind of, twist in the wind. And I still strongly do, and I cannot wait for the day that the pot still file gets changed. We no longer have to, the fact that like non-GI pot still has become a stock phrase, like almost a category of Irish whiskey, is so odd. And I've had a few like Scots and Americans talk to me about having come across this phrase and, well, I can't find the definition online. What is it? So again, I a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, but there's certainly a sense of honesty and integrity. And for me, like what it ultimately comes down to is that the fact that the industry can have those arguments that are based on very real things rather than just a hodgepodge of USPs and kind of jockeying for position, for me is a sign of health, that mightn't have been there before.
There are a lot of questions coming in around your thoughts on the direction of Irish whiskey today, the technical file. I will come back to them. I want to put them in the right place because I think there's a nice narrative here that I want to follow in the journey towards what we're about to discuss now with your upcoming release and book. So, folks, if you've asked any questions, I have them here. I'm not going to forget them. I'm going to get to them. But I want to continue that journey from your thesis is coming close to an end. October, November, December, you'll hopefully, for your sanity, put this all to bed. And then somewhere along the line, you got the idea that there's another book in this. So the thesis alone wasn't enough of a labor for you, and you didn't bleed enough through the production of the thesis. And you thought, you know what, I could do with a little more pain. I should write another book. How did that, what was the bridge to the book?
I think the book came about. I mean, I always assumed I would write another book, you know, and since The Glass came out, like a month later, people started asking me about when's the second edition coming out. You know, it's amazing, you know. And then the second edition came out, and they had something to be sorry about. But we won't dwell too heavily on that. There, you know, I never wanted to repeat A Glass of Party. It belonged to a moment, you know, when pot still was, you know, finding its feet, and when it was, you know, when what was out there was Middleton and this and that, and so there was always the assumption to be something. And certainly, like halfway through the thesis, it started to kind of gain traction. Certainly during lockdown, during COVID, when it was kind of left alone with my thoughts, the book became more of a thing. And it was meant to be a very different book originally, much more along the kind of traditional whiskey book lines of like a guide book. And then I just decided I didn't want to write that kind of book. There's too many of them. They can be great, but they're not what I wanted to do. And I spent my little, you know, government money fund weekly buying loads of stuff off of the, like, you know, what was the service called? You know, the little whiskeys by the dram. I'm thinking this will all go into the book, and anyway, none of that is. So I just ended up with a lot of like, you know, 50 ml pours around the house, because Irish whiskey is beyond that. I mean, world whiskey is beyond that space, but Irish whiskey is too. Some sort of completist, whatever, you know, and so the book changed, and there were a lot of kind of pet topics that arose during the thesis that I didn't get to talk about further. And I remember the day I clicked, there was an index of, I was looking for a word that I came across, in Irish, a kind of rather obscure word, Beilty, Beiltidh, which means oats used in putching, as a, you know, a mash bill word from the Donegal Rosses. And anyway, through some sort of rabbit hole, I ended up on the UCC Seán Riada archive. So for those who don't know, Seán Riada was an Irish composer and ethnomusicologist who collected a lot of tunes in Ireland. He's very kind of strong attachment to Cork, his archives are kept at University College Cork. And my mate, Paddy Padraig Mochaon, wrote his PhD on Seán Riada and teaches down at UCC. And so I called him and said, Paddy, you know, what is this? It says putching recipe. And I got he went in and wrote it down and gave it to me. And I thought, Jesus, you know, this is something strange. I have this person's pocket recipe for putching written on the back of a grocery receipt, you know. There's more here, you know, and that started to really change the way the book thought about itself. Absolutely, you know, and it hasn't kind of looked back since. So there was always the you know, and the book has kind of come in a strange crescendo as the thesis has wrapped up like this. The book has kind of gone from being like a side thought to, you know, and now there's like there's a 20,000 word document on the laptop that's just planning for the book stuff, outlines, and I had to kind of set a law with myself that I wouldn't open it, because I knew if I did that I wouldn't look at the thesis. It's just so much better track to write, you know, so different, and I found myself kind of thirsting for that kind of writing. You know, academic writing is very different and very argumentative and very clear. You know, you don't say that people enjoyed something, you say that, you know, people had a different perception of something, you know, and that the, you know, whatever, God forbid anything be done for taste or whatever, you know, which is healthy to have, like in the as a spine, a certain kind of thermometer to bullshit, you know. But similarly, you know, I've always had an attraction to that kind of folk ethnography approach to history of people's recipes, people's lived experiences. Absolutely, that stuff, gives me a little more sauce in the water than.
So here is the book. Here is the a beautifully, I have to say, a stunningly produced tome, which you'll be spending the next portion of your life dedicated to bringing to life, to making the reality as beautiful as what we have presented here on the screen. Help us understand then what the title of this book means and how you might summarize this book to those who haven't got the privilege of the depth of your knowledge on whiskey and distillation.
Yeah, and sorry if anyone's noticed that I'm pouring off screen. It's a bit of, and Barry probably knows what it is, but we'll hold that.
Drop here as well.
Creator, I mean, even the title was a long time in creation. Obviously, for those who don't know, creator, more often spelled in English CRAYTHUR or CATAR, any number of anglicizations. But anyway, it comes from creature, and for me, and it's a kind of a dated. Here's to the creator, the best thing in nature. Yeah, exactly. The humors of whiskey, and there, it is a slightly dated nickname for whiskey in Ireland. But one of my favorites, because it had this sense of to create, or a creation, something made out of raw materials, out of stuff. You're taking raw materials, water, grain, yeast, and even yeast in the early days is like water and grain and then not enough air, or something airborne and then not enough air, and then this strange thing, and then distilled into vapor and recondensed. And for me, it always brought it back to its kind of primeval meaning. And even the idea of creature, there's a certain guilt in the word creator. He's awfully fond of the creator, the creature. There's a slightly demonic kind of hauntedness about it, and I wanted the book to have the capacity of dealing with that, of this kind of social history as much as anything, that it has been so many different things in so many people's lives, and have the, if we could have in a whiskey book the emotional maturity to talk. I mean, Sean O'Riordan died of cirrhosis, and yet, and one of the most, the chapter on his poaching recipe is called On Buchel Quail Dove, and all the chapters are named from throwaway lines in archival sources, but On Buchel Quail Dove is an old euphemism for poaching, the dark, slender boy, from the bottles, from, they would all been dark bottles, and there is that eeriness and that, complication there. And so, similarly, there is all, for every song that there's the send up poaching, there's the songs that are about the unease, and similarly, when you're talking about it through any cultural lens, I wanted to be able to talk about, say, like, when talking about Jameson, there's a chapter on Harry Clarke's pamphlets for Jameson, the great kind of, folk glass artist. Harry Clarke, for those who don't know, Ireland in the 1920s did pamphlets for Jameson, and they look very kind of Baroque, and there's, they're works of art, really. And to be able to, for me, there's this whole wellspring of kind of Irish cultural attachment to whiskey that has been thinned out by the 20th century, and there's a sense of reclaiming that. And that's what I wanted, creature to be. And originally the title was Creature in English, because when I saw creator down on paper, I thought, the cringe kicks in and you think, this looks like it belongs in the Bloody Carols in a gift shop in Temple Bar. I'll just call it Creature, and that'll keep it direct. And then it was Marcus, the photographer and design half of the project, who kind of nudged me, him and Laurie Dwyer on the other arm, saying, like, you have to do. And then when I wrote it down in Irish, and you could see create more clearly, and it didn't have the kind of baggage of Hiberno English, and also there was the strangeness about the word, and it's certainly touched on in the introduction to the book, which is that, creator, I had always assumed the word was just a kind of an Irishy pronunciation of the word creature, and then when you look back in Irish, it is creator, And creator, I mean, obviously all of it's originally from Latin, but creator as a word, if you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the, you know, the arch text of English language history, and if you look at Corpus, the Royal Irish Academy resource, which is the equivalent of the Irish language, and so I would trust both quite heavily. And the word creator is older than creature. They both come from Latin, but the Latin came into Irish long before it came into English via French in Middle English. And the first record of creator in Irish is literally, it's a description of the monsters encountered by Brendan the Navigator at sea. You know, quite evocative, you know, nothing to do with whiskey, but quite evocative stuff. And then you're left wondering, like, well, did the word for whiskey come from that? But did it come from the other? And that, for me, you know, is part of what whiskey is, that unknowingness and a lot of bullshit in between, a lot of pub blather. And I thought, okay, this is the title I want, if only so I can launch into it through that, you know, that unknowingness, that strangeness, and back and forth. And then this word creature, and even, you know, seeing it in Irish makes it more specifically about the drink, you know, and talking about it as something haunted by itself. You know, it just started to make so much sense, you know, that I'm almost amazed I ever thought of any other title.
So it sounds like it's a social, cultural connection to the more factual aspects of the thesis, in the sense of you seem to have extracted stories, human stories and elements that you've connected with, that you want to bring forth through the people onto the pages.
Yeah, it's just a welling up of, and it's not all from the thesis. It's certainly not the like softball version of the thesis.
Yeah.
But a lot of stuff that came up during the thesis will go into it. Topics that I would love to discuss in a different way. And then a lot of it's come through just, you know, obviously the contemporary whiskey industry. You know, it's not a history book at all. And through this kind of rebirth, and anything, you know, like, it would be a surprise to nobody. There's a chapter there on Balkan, the project with Brendan, you know, and that was a child of the thesis. But then similarly, you know, it's not all just history. That raw material kind of aspect, certainly like Mashbuilds obviously feeds very directly into that. But even talking about barley varietals, or, you know, Lisa Ryan down at Chagas has been very supportive and talking about the new and kind of bold industry. But similarly, there's this idea of made from stuff, take it out of the USP kind of space and just bring it back to first principles, and whether that be folk history or whether that be material history, and all of the things that excite me, whether it be lab analysis or whether it be agricultural research or talking to farmers, anything that can bring it back. I mean, I absolutely fell in love with Marcus's cover, which is on there, and the fact that it wasn't a bottle of whiskey on it and it was just a grain. You know, I fell in love with the book again, just seeing that, you know, and I was lucky to get him, you know. For those who don't know, Marcus is a design agent within the whiskey world, a remarkable photographer who came up to me, and he's been a friend for many years. But when I was doing the blind sensory panel, he sent me an email saying I'd love to show up and just take profile shots for the people who are attending as a kind of a marker of the event. And ever since I saw these kind of wonderful, humane photos, I was just working up the guts to ask him if he would come on board for the book. And eventually I got drunk enough at a pub that I kind of pitched it. You know, it's wonderful to have that, because obviously that's the part of it that's not me. And it has, and I think we're coming from a similar place of that attitude towards the revival of the thing, and towards a kind of an authenticity around it, and you know, not being obliged to just talk about everyone, you know, but to talk about the things that genuinely excite me and that thrill me, whether they be new spirits or maturing stock, a certain type of maturing stock, you know, maturing up in Ecklenville in a fucking cask type, or it be a receipt with a recipe for putching on the back of it, or it be sitting down in a lab talking about gas chromatography. These kinds of diverse conversations. A Glass Apart could never have been this. I could never, even if we had the industry we have, and if I could have written it, we wouldn't have had the industry we do. You know, so it's a parallel, you know, universe away from the last book, which is what I wanted it to be. You know, absolutely.
We're very excited to to see you dive into another book, and for us to be lucky enough to get to read this in the coming years. There's a journey ahead of where the book is one element of the journey, and you've come up with a master plan. We'll give it a title, Master Plan, not harebrained idea. We'll call it a master plan. And the master plan is involves there's really three legs of the stool, from what I can gather, of what you want to do between now and 2028. Could you help us understand where the book plays into this journey and what other elements come together over the next few years?
Yeah, so I suppose there's, I always had this assumption that the book was next. And then there's just the question of what do I was living off of student funding, quite frankly. And obviously that comes to an end. Well, it already has come to an end. But anyway, another story. But there had to be some framework to make this happen, and I got a few conversations with publishers, and some of them were very high profile and worked on with some kind of, people that I would have an enormous amount of esteem for. And I kept getting back the pitch that, like, look, what we'd really like from you is a guide to Irish whiskey, an Irish whiskey 101, and we'll run with that. And there was this kind of, look, I want to stick to my guns and write this, but I can't breathe air. Well, I can breathe air. I can't eat air. And similarly, Marcus has to, take time to do this, and his considerable talents taken aside from other, and and aside from that, just an awful lot of expenses would build up, just driving places, sleeping overnight in places, and this will take a year and a half. All these ancillary costs. We're doing a bit of traveling, even outside of Ireland for some of the chapters. But I very much knew the book when I had this like 20,000 word document. This blueprint looking thing. I already know what the chapters are about, the stuff that needs fine tuning or a partner or this or that. But the schemata is quite defined. The titles are all defined, and some of them involve. I would love to talk to someone in France about phylloxera. Full stop. I would. It was such a part of Irish whiskey history. These kinds of international elements, and then similarly, just talking to people, bringing people to Ireland to talk to them, about certain topics that come up, like when we're talking about like peatland research. For instance, one chapter is about Maslin, which is mixed grain agriculture, and I kept running across this in thesis where people talking about Maslin flour going into whiskey, and Maslin is now very kind of trendy again for like sustainability stuff, but it's historically it was just you got better yields out of like winter wheat if you grew it with winter rye, and this kind of farmers know-how has become kind of interesting again, but it was wiped out by monoculture. And so I remember one of the first early, and he's probably told more people, or at least as many people as I have, because he's very excited about it. Conor Ryan down at Pierce Lyons saying, when I told him the story about Maslin, he said, "We'll make a Maslin whiskey." I said, "What do you mean you'll make a Maslin?" He said, "We'll grow Maslin in Dunboyne and make a pot still. The pot still is oats, wheat, and rye adjuncts. We can make a Maslin one, and blah blah blah, and all that stuff." And there's an example where like Irish material and kind of gastro history is a direct reflection of the history of Irish agriculture and those kind of things. So I'd love to, there's a few people who research Maslin who I'd love to bring in, the main guys out in New York. I'd love to be able to bring them to Dublin. These kinds of ancillary costs just build up. So it was about building a space without taking money off of people. Again, integrity is a very important thing to me, so it was central that we kind of be ourselves, be a little wild. I think we have great relationships in the world. They know us, and Marcus too, because he has a history of working with distilleries. These are our friends, but at the same time, keep the thing independent.
So you're creating a crowdfunding model to bring this book to life over the next 3 years, and while that book is being written, there are other elements that'll take place as well. So the crowdfunding model, which is a great way to, like you said, give yourself the space to be able to do what you want without any pressures, or if it needs to go down certain rabbit holes, you have the ability to do that because you're getting independent support through the crowdfunding model. But while you're writing the book, you have a couple of things in mind, kind of before the book and then after the book. What have you got in mind leading up to it? So we'll talk about the crowdfunding piece in a second, but there's a series of talks that you're hoping to roll out between now and the time of publishing, is there?
Yes. So in an effort, we talked about funding this, and again, you know, older than distilling itself is the question how to get money. You know, one of the few things older than alcohol. But actually, I think no alcohol. Well, unless you count barter, you know, how to get no funds is a question older than time, whether it be fiat currency or otherwise. Anyway, there is a plan put in place, and basically what we're doing, you know, I'll be frankly honest about it. You know, I never took money off Boan for the thesis stuff. I could actually have if I declared it in the thesis, but I just didn't want to, and I wanted, you know, whatever hobby horse I was on at the time, and I'm still on. I you know, I just wanted to do it, and at the end, you know, when coming close to graduation, you know, the Cooney said, we'd like to give you a cask. And all right, you know, I'm not going to say no to my own bloody cask. And said, all right, pick one. And yeah, there was one that kind of stood out. And it's odd because, you know, I have emotional attachments to the Mashbuilds because of how and when they were found and this and that. So the one we ran with was the first Mashbuild I found. The first one that wasn't in a book, the first one that wasn't in, like, you know, there's a few kind of core works like Samuel Moore in this. The first that wasn't one of those, and the first that was found in an archive. But anyway, so we thought, okay, we'll build a fundraiser around this. You know, that's what I'll do with it. I don't know what to do with a cask of whiskey. Like, I can try and, like, you know, sear off my warts and bathe in it, but other than that, you know, I don't intend to start a brand of whiskey anytime soon, and certainly not with that stuff. And it became clear that this could, you know, if I could turn that cask into this book, it would A, allow the book to be made, and B, create a way of sharing the liquid. You know, it is very personal stuff. It will be in the book, absolutely. And then I started thinking, okay, well, I don't want to be selling just like the promise of a bottle in X number of years. Is there some, and then this idea started to hatch of the kind of community that people could become a part of while we're writing the book. And it kind of plays into what the book was about anyway. So, you know, having these live events and online stuff on a kind of a quarterly basis to keep people in touch with how the book is going, but also to offer, I mean, severely geeky stuff. You know, even if we weren't fundraising, like stuff you'd be hard pressed to get anybody to sit through willingly. And now I'll have a captive audience. You know, when we're talking about like how the grain whiskey made for Bushmills in the 60s was coming out of the Coleraine distillery, and they're using barley for the grain, and then it got swapped out when that was close. That kind of stuff, you know, real just like fingernails in the dirt kind of Irish whiskey geekdom. And then just batshit stuff that I'd like to talk about, like alchemical manuscripts and mentions of aqua vita as, like, you know, a recipe for the philosopher's stone, and odd stuff. So the pitch to people is that, like, look, if you want to partake in this, there's a lot of goodwill with distilleries in Ireland to host some of, obviously the live stuff we have to do at capacity, just because, you know, venues have capacities and blah blah blah. And we'll run it at like running cost, whatever it costs us to rent spaces and get liquid and whatever. But it'll be cheap as chips. And then the online stuff, obviously, is just crack among friends wherever they may be based, and to have that sense of attachment, I think, you know, to the book was what I could offer, even more than the cask itself. So that's what's available for the kind of support scheme while it's being written. Absolutely.
So to summarize, and I think it's a great model, and I want to make sure everyone's clear on what it is. So you've got this wonderful cask of whiskey that you were part of the distillation of, because it was from the Vintage Mashbill research program at Boan Distillery. That cask is maturing away. In 2028, that'll be bottled up. and released. Two Stacks are helping with that. The folks Shane and Liam and Donald are helping with making that happen.
Mhm.
Between now and then, there will be the series of talks that will be held in Ireland. There will be the writing of the book and the release of the book. And so you're looking at between now and 2028, all of these things will come together, maybe sooner, maybe a little bit later, depending on how things move. And the hope is that independently you can get this funded. And like you've said, the smartest way to do that is just divide the cask up into as many portions as is humanly possible. And that will fund through the purchase of a cask share, copy of the book, and access to all the talks will allow you the time and space to be able to produce all this and give us, the lucky whiskey enthusiasts, a chance to dive deeper into your world on this journey with you. And there are 400 places, 400 shares, 400 places available in this crowdfund. Would that be a good summary of it?
Yeah, and there's the sense, and again, it keeps us. I mean, Fionnán facilitate the thesis. They already knew they were in the book, and Two Stacks, who are our partner, who haven't gotten a mention yet from me tonight, but Two Stacks were enormous in this because obviously I can't sell alcohol, and all this stuff is in a kind of a gray area. So I don't actually own the cask in principle. It went from Fionnán to Two Stacks. Two Stacks are looking after it. They'll handle. I mean, and both of these, like obviously the tax man will get a good slice of the pie, but Fionnán aren't taking anything, and Two Stacks are doing it at cost. And there's been a lot of love from both of them about this, and it'll go in the book. This is the bottle of the book, and we undersold the cask contents. We could have pushed it out to 450, but we said, okay, we'll hold some back, and that can be dipped into at events and this and that along the way. So who can get to Newry on certainly one of the live events would be at Fionnán, and one will be at Two Stacks at the bare minimum. And there'll be the kind of testing of it. We can only do so much because it has to. We have to make sure there's 400 for everyone, but to have it be that connection that it all belongs to us. So, and it will occur in print. That there's a scene in the book where I and some friends are drinking this and talking about it with Two Stacks, and it's discussed. It's enshrined in the book. Now, as a 3-year-old, the stuff turns 3 in December of this year. Right when the writing kicks off, really, now this is going to start until 2024, and part of that's because I have to finish the bloody thesis revisions and all this stuff and clean it up and just draw a line. And second of all, there's the whole. I mean, the whole thing is based around 24. There's 24 chapters in the book. Next year is actually the 700th anniversary of 1324. If anyone's been paying attention, so there's a good connection to this concept, and to this space, and the year itself. There was already talk in the whiskey world among a few people about how do we mark this or this or that, and so the year has a kind of an aura. But we were going to kick it off in 1324, so that'll be when this starts. Absolutely.
Okay. It's amazing. Like it's a great idea to bring all these pieces together and to follow the journey along, and to allow us to follow the journey along, because the worst thing I think that could happen is we lose you for the next 4 or 5 years as you have your head down and things, or 3 years, and you're busy doing these things, and we don't get to maybe get snippets or insights into it, which I think the talks, which I think you're very cleverly calling the creature hedge school, the poor creature hedge school, will give us insight into. So look, I'll be buying into it myself, and I think a lot of our audience will be as well. What part of, like, you've gone through the book writing process before? Now you've got these 2 other elements, the whiskey and these talks. Which of these are you looking most forward to, and how will you balance all of these and think about how all these things play together? Everything will be demanding of your time. I mean, the whiskey will mature with or without you, but there'll be calls upon your your time for all of this. How are you looking ahead to it, or is that TBD to be figured out?
No. I mean, it won't be that. I mean, they're symbiotic. Like, there were calls on my time when I was writing A Glass of Park, because I was writing it I started when I was still writing a master's, and it was in the crevices of life. So any time spent on this, more than pays its way in free time to write, absolutely. I'd probably retract a bit from anything else, in terms of, society stuff or this or that. I'll still be, I'm still around in Dublin, but at the same time, it gives me an awful lot of focus and clarity, and even having people there kind of keeps the book on pace as well, and
Yes.
having this to show to people. It's not that big of an ask, really. Again, what's a night here and there, and some liquids, and it lets the book do what it's supposed to do anyway, and it keeps me enthused. They're strange, unlike the thesis, which had a lot of information that I had the kind of the emotional burden of keeping to myself. This is the opposite, where I no longer have to do that, and I can just glibly tell people what I'm doing, and
Yes.
have that space, and certainly because there's a lot of liquid going on. Many of the chapters are historical recreations. So, I've spoken to Connor about, well, can we have one of the live events at Pierce Lyons when you do this Maslin stuff, and giving people a taste of, letting them be involved in that space is a joy, So I don't see it as a distraction at all. They're all part of the same thing. The writing will take up, 95% of the real time, and then the rest is kind of a bit of crack, So I'm very confident about it. Certainly after the miserable grind. If anyone on here has done a PhD, they'll know, after that, everything else just looks like a great barrel of fun,
It's nice for us as enthusiasts that we get to follow along, but you're a brave man putting all of us in rooms at various stages during the writing to be able to ask you, is the book done yet? Is the book done yet? Is the book done yet? There's a bravery to this approach, as well as it's a joy for us, but I'm sure you're ready for the questions.
I mean, that happened. I remember when I took up the thesis, and actually that same mate, Paddy, we were in a pub, and he said, "Oh, that's very," I told him I got funding, which I had learned from John Quinn earlier that day, and he goes, "That's very interesting. Have people started asking you if you're done yet?"
Yeah.
No, I didn't even start. It's going to become a part of your life. And then, if I can, deal, and it's almost still a joke among PhD candidates, this whole, your parents going to start going, are you living in a protracted infancy? But after that, the book writing is a joy. Absolutely. And even the travel, I actually more or less wrote the introduction chapter, the very chapter 0 is set in Dingle. And I can share that because everyone resident in Dingle knew why I was down there. And, for me, it was a good place to start because Dingle, I remember the founding of the Dingle Distillery. I remember, going down when Dick Max were getting into whiskey. That was that early. And Oliver, rest his soul, was there pitching the distillery, and there was a great mood in the room. And Oliver was such a kind of a garrulous figure, And I remember that night, that weekend, and for me, it was such a sense of optimism in the room. And so I wanted to begin the introduction there because whatever about history or revival, the new landscape began in Dingle. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Revival, and to lay out the cards early on. This is what this book is about. It pretends to be about history, but it's really about, the younglings. And what are we like now, and what are we doing, and that was another part of it is, and certainly your viewers would probably feel this in America, there's a strange disconnect between the Irish whiskey, what's exciting and on the ground at the moment, and then what's known and available elsewhere. And I've run across this writing for various, magazines and whatnot, where again, what's in the US or what's known it feels behind,
Yeah.
They think it's exciting to get Green Spot, and so much so I wanted to be able to do a book that wasn't a like purchaser's guide to what's on shelves. And where I could, for that, when I went down to Dingle, I literally, that chapter is a conversation between me and Graham in a warehouse, pulling stock as it turned 10 years old, and just talking about, where have we come, where are we going, and that, 10 years on from that moment, revisiting that stock, and then Graham's come in, and what do we do, and that's a big part of what I want the book to be, that sense of, at the risk of sounding poncy, kind of esprit de vivre,
Yeah.
So that's it, that's the impetus anyway.
Well, congratulations on the journey so far, the journey to the starting line. Is can be as challenging as the journey to the finishing line. So fair play that you've got this packaged up. So again, folks, look, it's an opportunity to be part of a journey. Some of you are very interested in Irish whiskey history, distillation history. Many of you have enjoyed Fionnán's chats and time with him, be it on the whiskey bus, on lock-ins, Shebeen's, our History of Irish Whiskey podcast, which Fionns was kind enough to do with us last year as well, which meant so many of you enjoyed. And it's just a continuation as we deepen our knowledge of distillation and whiskey and get a better appreciation of how we got to today, why we got there, and where it might lead us in the future. So the details are available on irishwhiskeywatch.com. There's a press release there. It goes live on creator.ie. I put the link on the website there or on the comments there. It's also on irishwhiskeywatch.com. October 31st, so Halloween, 8 p.m. Irish time, midday Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So before you go out knocking on doors looking for candy, you can go and sign up there if you're interested. Just 400 spots available. And I did see online already quite a bit of interest on other Facebook groups and online already, which is great to see. So with a bit of luck, this will be sold out very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed, because this is our livelihood for the next while, and there is a sense, and I enjoy having that sense of debt to actual whiskey lovers. I didn't want people to buy this as just an investment, and I think the fact that, so the other thing about the bottling, and again the name is on Creator Box, the poor creature, fittingly for the kind of cap in hand type ethos of the whole thing. But 7 years, is a resonant number for those who've looked into kind of Irish whiskey, especially pot still history. O'Connor was a 7-year-old. Jameson was not a drop sold till it's 7 years old. Oak Powers was a Three Swallows was a 7-year-old. So I wanted to treat the cask, not as a super old whiskey, but as something that still had its mash bill apparent and was a kind of a throwback in of itself, and preserve that kind of identity. And it just fits really well with the timeline, and then similarly, the kind of weight, keeps away some of the flipping behavior or whatever. I very much genuinely want it to be a community-led thing. I do enjoy and get fulfillment out of that. And it tags into what the book is about. Is that a fitting time to tell people what's in our glasses?
Yeah, please. Yeah, let's do that. So I have a sample here that I've been sipping on, and Fionnán's been sipping on, but we might as well talk about it.
So, as many of you know, and some of you may have guessed, the Boan Vintage Mash Bill program fed this cask. And that was done through a spread of 10 mashes, and I feel a different relationship with each and every one of them. I'm absolutely honest saying that, because for me they tag into all kinds of bizarre stuff that's nothing to do with how they actually taste, and I probably have a skewered perception of them. But certainly, mash 10 is something that a close kinship. So I found this mash in what's called the Locks collection, and anyone who wants to do the math without offending any branding bodies can work out what distillery that came from, and it's difficult, obviously, when you find this old stuff, and it can be associated with brands that are still alive or the brands that have been resuscitated, and it can become quite tricky. So like I had a great experience with Ecklenville where they were fascinated to distill the old Cumber mash bill when I found that up in the Public Records Office in Northern Ireland, and they have stock of that laid down. So all their pot still is called Old Cumber to date anyway. They very much embrace that concept, but there is also some 12% oats, 40% malt 48% raw barley distillate laying down in Ecklinville, and I don't think many Americans would probably have seen this, but BBC and we did a documentary, and that was very much the kind of cornerstone narrative was the old Cumber mash with Ecklinville. So that's an example of very positive, and that was again part and parcel of the whole thing that fed. I mean, that's going into Creator as well. Part and parcel of these strange conversations I started to have incidentally with friends that started to feed stuff. But certainly the part that's in the thesis as the experiment is the Boan stuff. And yeah, when I had the opportunity, I wanted it to be a sherry barrel for obvious reasons. Again, that historical throwback. And I wanted it to be 7 years old. And then that mash, 40-40-15-5 is a kind of, it's a play on, like, it's not a lot of mash bills, to be honest, from that era would look similar to that, except they'd be like 4% wheat and 1% rye. Rye was, for many of them, very small. And then basically in the 1940s, the Kilbeggan distillery, the Locks, the Brisbane distillery, whatever you call it, we're not using any wheat at all. And part of that was to do with what was called in Ireland the emergency, where you had to get the polite word for World War II. And wheat was rationed, and you had to get basically a certificate to use wheat, and alcohol was at last on the list. And some people still did get it through the 1940s. But anyway, Locks clearly swing away from wheat altogether. And so it's a snapshot. It's not, and that's what I wanted to say with the thesis. It's not like there were distillery recipes that lasted all through time, but even within distilleries, they changed in response to the world around them and this and that. But that was the first one I found, and I found the reasoning for it. And I was really thrilled. I went through heaps of stuff in the National Library before finding that. And so it was, I don't know if it got a bit of bias for me. I like American rye whiskey anyway. That and peated single malt are probably neck and neck for bronze place behind Irish pot still, my kind of love affair inclinations. But the fact that, and it had the 15% oats, it had a reasonably high raw barley content, because some of the ones that fell below 40% raw barley tasted less pot stilly than what we're used to. And that was a bit strange. Now, there's a lot of modern pot still, that's less than 40 as well, coming up the pipelines for people. But anyway, it made sense for a lot of reasons. And so, yeah, it became again, and I'm enormously indebted to Boan for their expertise, and Two Stacks the same, who have just, it is literally Two Stacks cask now. And they've taken so much responsibility and logistics and stuff that I wouldn't have the foggiest clue about on board.
Yes.
So, it has been a huge part of, I don't know, facilitating the lungs of the book, And I think a lot of people
to bring it all together. There's no shortage of people needed to weigh in and to contribute to bring it all together, is there? I mean, from Boan to Two Stacks, just even scratching the surface. That's a picture of the original new make spirit that was released in the little packs, a little bottle of it here. So that was it at 0 years old, and now this is it at close to 3 years old, or 2.5 years old, I guess, is it?
Yeah, it turns 3, I think, December 18th. I was
okay.
looking at the task, yeah.
Nice little journey there between the two. And so you mentioned this would have been an original Locks distillery,
Locks
mash bill.
So if you look at some of the, the Kilbeggan pot still and the Kilbeggan rye, they were born out of a certain cognizance that Locks pot still had these things in it. But this was an exact replica, more or less, decimalized exact replica. And yeah, I remember even looking at the Mashbuilds, I was quite fond of this one. It had this kind of strange, like, nectarine kind of smell off it when it was young, when it was new make. Almost like a potpourri, kind of a lot of rye. And this is all triple distilled as well, so it's not like American rye whiskey. But a lot of, people think of rye as like rye bread. Certainly a lot of rye can taste like rye bread, like pastrami sandwich kind of taste. And that puts as many people off as it endears to rye. But light rye, and certainly like some of this triple distilled stuff and in small quantities, can have these weird, like, lavender kind of smells, almost like again, dead flower, hyacinth, potpourri. And this had that, it was amazing how strong it was for something that's just 5% rye. Then that 15% oats, and one of the big sensory takeaways was that oats smell like icing sugar. They smell like, you know, icing gelato cake, you know, stuff that is sweet but not fruity, basically. Glycerin, etc. And that kind of dusted baking sugar is certainly there still. For me, when I smell it now, it smells a little like the juice that holds tin peaches together, if that makes sense. When I was a child, I had a terrible habit of drinking that stuff, you know.
It is very, very sweet and juicy on the nose. Like my first thought was even like a wine cordial almost on the nose. It's very, very sweet, very juicy.
There's a strange, like, again, I was always surprised. Some of them, like I've seen some of the casks that people, you know, and again, it meant a lot to me. I did keep track of, you know, obviously I had no money involved, but I did keep track of the pubs and the clubs and the retailers that bought casks, because it meant a lot to me, that kind of endorsement, you know. And certainly Two Stacks bought 5 of them, you know, and I think that, you know, that and other people did as well. Daithí O'Connell and, you know, again, JJ Corey Louise bought, you know, etc. It meant a lot in most.
We've got a few.
That kind of. But I had, you know, the first taste of any of them I had were in Two Stacks warehouse, because they had them all there, and it was either that or like getting them out of Stafford's. So anyway, I remember trying some of the Two Stacks ones, and 2 of the ones they have in sherry are just like sherry bombs. I mean, it's astounding how deep and rich they are. You've had them at that Cork Society event.
Yeah. Well, I can only imagine, like after 7 years in this other roasted sherry cask, what we're going to get in terms of that nutty dark fruit evolution.
Yeah, I mean, when I tried this, I was almost relieved that it wasn't as just like bombed with sherry as. They were great, but they were like very much like, you know, dream casts in the maggot era. You know, that's a horrible compliment, actually, maggot era. But anyway, but the more I smell this, the more you can get that kind of walnutty thing from the cask.
Yeah.
You know, I was almost hankering for it to taste more like the new make, and it does. It has that nectarine smell, absolutely. It has that weird dusted sugar. It does smell like pot still, absolutely. And that's part of it. You know, we'll be pulling from it at least, you know, certainly a few of the events, certainly the one that's at Two Stacks, you know. Again, all this stuff is on a rolling, you know, there's a lot of stuff involved with the book that comes from pet topics that are from kind of outside any distillery, like, you know, the domestic distilling journal of 3 women in Clare is something I don't think people have come across before, that I've been holding like a bosom secret until like my lungs bleed, you know, because it's just that kind of folk history of like 3 generations of women in Clare writing down their recipes for usquebaugh, and you think, my God, how have I not told, you know, and there's so, and like the Shauna Reid stuff, or like the Harry Clark stuff, that's, or like finding weird words in Irish for oats in Puchin in Deneen, you know, all that stuff animates me very heavily. And similarly, the real history of people working in whiskey now, the John Quinns of the world, those lived experiences animate me just as much. This book is firing on a lot of cylinders at once, you know, and it comes from a place, and I think the whiskey industry know that, of at least desired authenticity of my. And there I start using a phrase like my truth. But my truth, that's certainly not going in the thesis. But you know,
you are a trusted source. Like you're a dependable, trusted source for knowledge, and I think that will shine through in this book, which will add. Look, as if it needed another endorsement from me, but you hit the nail on the head there. I do wonder if. I wonder if we could just take a few minutes to answer a few questions. I know you've got a hard stop as well in a few minutes.
I'm good for time.
Dinners are being cooked in different directions, and bed is being called. But I want to hit on a few questions here that have come in that tie in with all of this, and I don't want to take away from any of the discussions here we're having about Creator. But while we have you here, we're going to monopolize your time, and we're going to take everything we can out of you. This is from Tyrone up in Nova Scotia. With the recent dramatic increase in the number of distilleries in Ireland and around the world, is there a risk that we might see another collapse or retrenchment That's a question that gets asked a lot lately. Where does your head lie?
This is it. Like looking at this kind of stuff all day, which you can see it is total gallons, distilled ale and beer, wine, spirits, blah blah blah. Records from, if that appears on the screen, the 1700s down, and you can see Irish whiskey has always gone through a boom and bust economy for 300 years. So I wish the new industry luck. Long history gives you a weird kind of sobriety about some stuff. And you can't pick and choose who closes, not that I would wish closure on anyone, but it's all I can say is, when you look at recourse to history, and the same thing has happened in Scotland. There was the infamous whiskey lock of the 80s and the boom and this and that, and I hope it's, it doesn't happen to anybody, but it's just an inevitable aspect of the world, full stop. And again, part of what drew me to writing a book like this is I won't name names. There's a lot of people I have no compunction to write about, because I can tell that they're, market entrants who are coming cynically on the back of something. And there's nothing wrong with market entrants, but it's just not what I want to write about. I don't enjoy sitting with a straight face while someone tells me that they're passionate for whiskey and I know they're going to flip the company in 2 years. I don't care. I'd rather deal with Diageo. Absolutely, where where they're coming from. I don't want the faux Brendans of the world. But there's all kinds of mix and matches, and I don't want to be writing a book throwing stones at anyone. I just want to write. At this point, I want to breathe the free sea air and write about what I want to talk about. But I simply don't want to repeat anybody's bullshit. And so this is you can't pick the ones you want to survive. That's
no. And I think it also behooves us to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, as inevitable in any business, as any category. Businesses fail, yet are not the sign of a collapse of an industry. And I'd hate to see any one or two distilleries or brands fold, and it be the story is Irish whiskey is declining, which would probably be an inaccurate representation of what might happen.
Oh yeah, and it's funny. Like I put a strict moratorium on one question that I used to get all the time in emails from strangers, which was, can you find me the last distillery in X county? Now, it's actually pretty easy to look up. So it wasn't that hard. So and then I'd see it in a press release. Like an idiot, I didn't take any payment, but I'd see like first distillery in, whatever postal code in Longford, and in X years. And a lot of that bloody well came from, now it's so easy to look up that it doesn't really matter. But then you look back at these distilleries, and like some of them lasted for 3 years. And then, you'd hear people say, we take great inspiration from the Chandlers of Cork, or the O'Connors of Baldoyle or whatever. And it's all bullshit, and that, again, I don't want to be mean in the book. And I underlined that in red. I have a bunch of like soppy notes to myself at the start, half of which are like, rock music quotes and, something you never want leaking out in public, of like reminders to self to say true. And one of them is don't be mean, and I get no joy out of calling out the grift or this or that, unless they're, some people are bullies and they need to be called out. But other than that, just ignore them and talk about what animates you,
Tell me this question from Greg, and it's relevant to what we were discussing earlier. What is your take on what an expansion of the technical file, in other words, for those who are not familiar, a expansion of the permissible quantities of grains in a whiskey that can be called pot still whiskey? How does that impact innovation going forward, do you think?
I think it's a question of, emboldening people, and it's, I mean, you can make whatever the hell you want, as Brendan has been proving for years, and a number of other people too. I mean, like, again, Pierce Lyons behind the scenes been laying down heaps of non-GI compliant pot still, and other people have as well. And to a certain extent, it's for me, it's a point of semantic integrity. Are we what we say we are? And I've seen it presented in especially, you know, in certain kind of trade circles as a question of innovation or this or that. For me, it's an integrity question. Just like, are you making shit up or are you not? End of story.
Yeah.
You know, and do these words mean anything, or are you, you know? And that's because again, the liquid is the liquid, you know. And I look forward to a vibrant and interesting non-new single pot still file category, just like odd stuff made in Ireland. Absolutely, you know. But that was never the point for me. You know,
Yeah.
it is about moral clarity and heritage and treating it with a dignity. And that was the only reason I was in it. You know, again, but at the same time, it hasn't. But I mean, the number of people who've said to me, "We would love to do this, but we're waiting for the law to change." You know, we don't live in Bedlam. We don't, you know, live off the air and want no drink nor money. You know, we businesses survive off of real things, and it is a confidence thing for a lot of people, and I look forward to that changing for that very reason. Certainly, I feel, you know, there's a lot in the book. I don't want to make it about it's not a pot still book. It's not about it's not a glass of part two. You know, there's every bit of my experience as a Bushmills malt ambassador is in there for the first time I've ever put in print. My experience of Bushmill circuit. No, it's a small part. You know, it's like a couple sentences, but you know, it's there. You know, and certainly there's a lot of things about. I mean, I spoke about Bushmills for years, and you know, again, I wanted it to move away. I've had great chats with David Boyd Armstrong about, like, you know, Belfast Columnstill grain whiskey mash bills that I don't think anyone's heard. You know, it's about the broad category. But similarly, the pot still file obviously animates me. I obviously have a very strong personal and emotional stake in it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot. So, like, for instance, there's some stuff in the planning for descriptions of, like, what is wheat, what is rye, taking these things back to their elemental. Like, you know, rye has a bizarre history in Ireland. Any place name ending in taggle has to do with rye, because the Irish for rye is Shigal. So Untagall became Taggle. So like Captain Taggle, Drum Taggle, all these tiny little towns, there was rye grown there. So it's scattered around, you know. But it was never a big, you know, there's no real history of rye bread in Ireland. It's not like Eastern Europe or even Central Europe or even like Denmark, places that have rye connections. But it was there from like an early, I mean, even the name itself speaks, the fact that like Siegle in France, you know, the words are closer than like rye, which is a very Germanic word. And you can see how these things began. And like similarly, like, you know, one of the most, I went out with marching my thesis supervisor to the Caves of Fields out in Mayo, which for those of your viewers who aren't familiar, is a bizarre archaeological dig in West Mayo. And it's a very important dig in the history of European agriculture. But essentially a farmer said that he was finding walls under his bog, and he went to the authorities and to the, you know, again, UCD and people who would listen, and they said, that's nonsense. Do you know how long it takes a bog to form? These walls are in a bog, they're not under the bog. And he was saying, no, I know my bog better than ye do. It's under the bog. And he turned out to be right. And it like backdated the history of agriculture across Europe. Fascinating. His son became head of archaeology at UCD, you know, Seamus Caulfield, and then the grandson is run off back to Mayo to be a farmer. And, you know, and there they found, you know, because these walls mean one of two things, either cattle or agriculture. And, you know, and they were finding like traces of wheat, you know, detritus around and this and that. And think, all right, when we talk about, you know, the history of wheat in Irish mashes and like a grain that dropped out because of the famine. And how do we, I mean, my God, the hauntingness of being able to stand in Mayo and see it like Neolithic wheat, and then the place most affected by the thing that knocked wheat out. And how do we talk about this and the moral onus that was put on the cities for using wheat at all during this period, and get to grips with that, and then talk, you know, wheat is now a big sustainability grain and being encouraged in Ireland again, and have a chapter about wheat and mash bills that means more than it, you know, than face value. Then also, I never wanted to lose, you know, one thing I want to retain very heavily from the Glass Party is writing about whiskey as whiskey. You know, I'm not writing about whiskey as social consequence. It is very much about the taste of wheat, you know, and what it does, that bready taste, that carbohydrate taste that wheat gives to various, spirits. But there's that sense of so I have to wait till I get a reply from her, but I replied to an archaeologist at UCD about the possibly involving her in this project and doing like Neolithic wheat pot still, and saying, well, the history of Irish agriculture is older than the history of whiskey. And how do we reclaim in this, space what belongs to us of like emmer and millet and all this strange, well, millet doesn't get, but anyway, emmer certainly, of these Neolithic old grains and these things that have been in Ireland, and talk about this deep history. And up to the 1950s, things like Archer Sprat and all these barley varietals that are becoming in vogue again, Hunter, all that stuff, to talk about. And that's where creature comes in again, the idea of the creation, absolutely.
Isn't there a scene in The Amber Light with Dave Broom where they recreate an old Ishkabar, an old spirit in an old illicit still site, I think. They're feeding with the various herbs and the grains, and they're distilling a little poitín there.
I mean, it's it would be remiss of me not to mention Dave. He's been a very strong kind of influence for a long time. I count Dave as a very good personal friend at this point. But certainly, like, there's a bit in the planning. I don't think I've told Dave this, but it says "Stop copying Dave" in red, underlined. Because it was that personal. Certainly, in the recent books, the Japanese whiskey book, A Sense of Place, certainly gave me the boldness to pursue what I wanted with this book. There was that space. I remember that bit where he like goes to Clynleash and talks about the gunk in there. And what do you want to see the gunk at Clynleash? And certainly that attachment to Sense of Place. And certainly a sense of it coming from humans, from it being a spirit made by humans, in places. And definitely, there is one chapter, fingers crossed, that overlaps a little, 1 out of 24 overlaps a little bit with Scotland, where there's a tune called Machruiléir Huilehui, which is a Scots Gaelic tune, about rowing illicit whiskey from the north coast of Ulster out to Islay and being chased by the revenue, and speaks to a shared linguistic heritage and shared musical heritage. And we have something working on that front, both on the music and actually on the rowing element. And Dave was very close to that, so absolutely would tie in closely.
There's some questions here that I'm going to leave for Wednesday, when I know some of your members that will be more tied into the history of distillation. But there a couple more that we'll take before we let Fionnán go this evening. Which Irish distilleries excite you the most with either their return to historic production methods or with their breaking with tradition and experimenting with new things? Maybe you've mentioned them already.
Yeah, and there's more to come. I think certain distilleries that didn't excite me 4 years ago excite me now. There has been a change in ethos. There is part of why I wanted to crowdfund for all this is because there are people who excite me more than others. I'd rather include Killowen more than once than include everybody, kind of thing, and that's not just for Killowen, that's for a good few people, that I want the freedom to do that, because I'm not beholden. I'm not the census. It's not my responsibility to tell everyone's marketing USP to anything, and I've found that over the years, and it's a lot of great people to pull from, and that's the thing. But similarly, I work for nobody's marketing, not even Boan's, and they respect that, and again, I wanted to be in that space going into it, but people probably know the names I pick, Ecklenville, etc., and certainly there are the other thing that I kind of borrowed from Dave, and it was in the Amber Light, and certainly, like, I probably listened to the audible of A Sense of Place like 50 times. I actually listened to it first when I was in the airport on my way to Islay to negotiate that chapter with a partner distillery, and I fell in love with it. It was so refreshing. It cut through all the bullshit, all the spielcraft. But aside from the kind of historical and cultural angle and blah, blah, you just got a very strong sense of kind of Dave calling in on old friends. And
Yeah.
certainly that's what I would like to do in Ireland. People like Eric Ryan in IDL, or, you know, these people are my personal friends. And I wanted it to feel like that, even if they themselves have, you know, quite organic lines that they give to camera, many of which are born up by a personal, you know, whatever. They're not bullshit, but, you know, they have a thing that they're used to saying to camera, and I want to kind of veer them away from that, and just, look, here's me, we know each other, and let's have a chat. What are you doing? You know, and that's been a kind of a driving focus in terms of, you know, I don't want to say who gets picked or something stupid, but, you know, people, it won't be a massive surprise who's in there, definitely, you know.
Okay.
And it's really is, you know, like, people could fall out with me, you know, I'm easy to fall out with, you know, but we'll see.
We just got a few questions there. I want to clarify. Wednesday, we're having a Meet the Maker event with Fionnán, where we're going to dive even deeper into the history of distillation. So if you thought tonight was in depth, this is the surface level. And then we get deeper on Wednesday, where Fionnán's going to take 18 hours out of his 24-hour day and dive through every significant date, fact, and person in the history of distillation. No, we're just going to, I think, walk through some significant aspects of the history of distillation in Ireland and take more questions, because I think there's only so many we can possibly take in one sitting here. A lot of people talking about recession potentially in the US in the next year, and that might affect things. Kevin wondering if there's any plans for any other wood finishes for this release. It sounds like you're just full maturation Oloroso.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so full sherry maturation there. Finishing, of course, would not have been a thing back in the 1830s. The 1890s or 1930s, more, I think, in the last 20 years, really, 30 years. And for those who've just joined, we are talking with Fionnán, and on October 31st at 8 p.m. on crater.ie. We put the link already in the comments, and it's all available on whiskywatch.com, irishwhiskywatch.com, if you want to get more details of what's the journey that you can follow Fionnán on. Get a copy of his book, get a bottle of the whiskey, and get access to all the talks in person in Ireland over the next few years. That's going live on October 31st at 8 p.m. Eastern, and that's happening at crater.ie. Again, all details are on irishwhiskywatch.com. We've posted them in our social media channels. We'll put them in our newsletter next week, and we'll help promote this as we get closer to October 31st, because I want this to sell out for Fionnán. And so you'll get lots of notices of this coming up. Okay. Does Fionnán have a suggested list of sips for Wednesday evening? Yeah, we would like one drink from every century, Steve. If you can get hold of one of those in the last 700 years, that would be a good start. Something. What would you recommend? Any whiskeys or anything?
I mean, people are all for it. I'll just talk about. I mean, this is what I'm reading at the moment, or like going through it, the stuff. So if you have any touching to home, it's certainly, you know, a part of it that is, there's a lot to say, and I've never talked about before, so would make a good entry point into what the book's about. And yeah, I should have said up front, all the website stuff is going live. You know, it's the first time I've done a lunch, but I've seen enough grumbling about various lunches over the years that, you know, we're trying to kind of learn from precedent and be clear with people. The website will go live on Halloween. I think I saw some comment about, is that, no, it was picked on purpose, you know, because again, it's 2024, but technically Samhain, well, it's not the Celtic New Year's, you know, it's the dark half and the light half of the year. But anyway, it's close to New Year's, it makes no odds that we're rocking into this. And then just by chance, A Glass of Parts book launch was on Halloween in 2015, purely because Whiskey Live was the next day. And we did the launch the night before November 1st, which is when Whiskey Live was in those days. So again, it felt like the right time to launch all this stuff. And fingers crossed, it sells out quick, and, you know, Marcus and I don't have to worry about the money for the time being, and we can all kind of go boldly into this. And there's, you know, again, we can begin this kind of adventure. It'll kick off in 2024, but we can, you know, begin it with a stout heart. But similarly, I genuinely do mean that when I say I want people to join who are not looking to, even, I think that the time lag will delay some of the flippers or make them disinterested. But I do want to be part of it, absolutely.
And like I said earlier, I'll be jumping in on this. I want to be part of the journey because I want to learn. I want to have the crack along the way as well. And I'd encourage everybody who can to join in and support it. If you can't, don't worry, of course. But if you can, and you're interested, there's all the details, irishwhiskeywatch.com. We're going to wrap up on this one now, folks, because we could go all night, but I want to be respectful of Fionnán's time, and we will dive deeper into elements, anecdotes, perhaps, and important dates and events of Irish whiskey distillation and just the history of distillation of spirits on Wednesday evening. So we're having a Meet the Maker event for our Stories and Sips Club members. Microphones and videos will be open if you want to ask questions directly of Fionnán. We'll facilitate that. 7 p.m. Eastern, midnight Irish time on Wednesday. So you're getting a double whammy of Fionnán this week. You haven't heard from him for months, and you get him twice in 1 week. It's like waiting for a bus and then two come along at the same time. And but we're looking forward to Wednesday and diving into it. And I'm sure if there's any more questions on Crater, we can take them then as well. Remarkable project. I'm excited for you. And if there's anything else we can do to support it along the way, we'll of course do that. And please let us know. And hopefully you can give us some updates additionally on the journey, during the journey, in addition to all of these, the hedge school talks that you'll have. I'd love for us to be updated and our community to be updated as well, because there's still a book at the end of this, and even if those who aren't part of the original crowdfunding might participate or might purchase the book later on. So it'd be great to hear more from you as we go through it as well.
Grand.
Let me just double check last few questions here. Yeah, that's it. Everyone really excited. Folks, can we just give a round of applause virtually there to Fionnán and thank Fionnán for joining us this evening. I'm excited that we got to learn more about it and share the details with you. I think you got some sense of what's coming, but I think those who have heard Fionnán before now and heard him tonight, know that we've only scratched the surface of what this will cover. But look, what an important part of whiskey's history Crater will touch upon, and the thesis covers as well. So essential for us all to kind of keep abreast of it. So looking forward to diving in. We'll have lots of folks joining us on Wednesday night as well, which is great. And some folks who weren't here tonight will be able to join us on Wednesday. This, of course, it will be available as a replay. You can watch this tomorrow if you joined late. You can watch this tomorrow. Wednesday night will be recorded. It'll be available as a replay as well. That'll be on our website, storiesandships.com. If you're not a member of our whiskey club yet, still time to join and have a deep dive on the history of distillation with Fionnán on Wednesday. So thanks everybody for joining us. I've got some more updates to share, but Fionnán, we're going to let you go and get yourself some dinner and sustenance after a fair bit of downloading from your brain this afternoon. But thanks a million for what you've done for us here.
Cheers. Slán.
We'll see you soon again. All right. We'll see you Wednesday.
All
right. Thanks, Fionnán. All the best. Congratulations. Now, how about that? We could listen to Fionnán all day, but we can't take all of his day, or all of my night, or all of your night. So we're splitting it up into a few sessions. So this is the publicly available session where we launched or helped Fionnán launch and share his passion and what he's doing, and the three elements of this: the book, the whiskey, and the journey along with them. Again, all details are available on irishwhiskeywatch.com. You'll find updates there. All right. Just a few updates for you before we go tonight. You'll notice we didn't have Lauren with us tonight, so we missed Lauren, sadly, but Lauren will be back with us next week. She'll be joining us tonight in the audience, as many of you saw. And Stories and Sips updates, in addition to our Meet the Maker event. Just a reminder, if you want to be part of our blind tasting for Teeling whiskies, we've got our samples here. Many of you have already registered for our blind tasting taking place in early November. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to do so, because this week will probably be the first few days of this week, Monday, Tuesday, we'll probably end up closing registration so that we can get all these kits shipped out and finalize the date with the Teeling team. So storiesandships.com. If you want a whiskey kit shipped to you, just pay for the shipping and we'll ship a kit of these whiskies to you. And we'll be doing a tasting with Teeling early in November. A couple of other updates for you. We have teased out that our next club whiskey will be 2 club whiskies It'll be a pair of pot still whiskies from W.D. O'Connor, which is our still in, of course, happening. We haven't yet revealed the cask finishes. We've been waiting for labels to be printed so I'd have a proper kind of a graphic to show you, but we may not be able to wait for that. So I may share that this week. But the label printing, Ireland is just backed up at the moment with printers printing delays. So we're hoping to get that resolved in the next couple of weeks to be able to get those to you to be able to release these two whiskies as part of our second anniversary celebrations. There'll be a fundraising element to these whiskies too, in the sense of the purchase price. A portion of all purchases will go towards an important charity in Ireland to raise money. So we're using our second anniversary celebrations to raise money as well. So I'm trying to put together all those details. Timings are all in flux with depending on when we can get the labels and when we can get things shipped. So bear with me on that. Other news, we will have another tasting event potentially this side of Christmas, and it'll be a redbreast tasting. It'll be a redbreast tasting, and it'll be with a redbreast that you've never tasted before, I suspect, as well as two other redbreasts that you may have tasted or may not. But it'll be a chance to have a redbreast tasting with blender Dave McCabe live from Middleton Distillery, which is exciting. And we're working on a few others as well. But that's one that has come out of nowhere to be a thing. And if we can get our tasting kits finalized, by the way, do I have something I can show you? I think I do. This is a near finished prototype of our next little tasting box. Now it says here your sips await on the front. It'll say that on the inside instead, but inside will be there'll be a little foam insert here, 3 bottles inside. So this will be our little easily shippable tasting kit going forward. Nice. There's actually a nice pattern that you probably can't see in this light on the navy blue. And then the shipping label will just go right in the front here, and it'll ship like this, and it'll be very sturdy. It's been tested, and the bottles will sit between 2 thick layers of rigid card and foam as well. But this will be our new tasting kit. So this will be used for it, and there'll be a little card inside which will tell you what your 3 whiskies are, but they'll sit nicely in there. And I'm excited to see you get these. This is our last final prototype, and then we're going to approve the printing, and then we're going to order. We're going to order 5,000 of them. So we'll have a lot of them. We're going to order 10,000 bottles, 15,000 bottles as well. So kind of investing heavily in tasting kits for you all going forward. So the redbreast tasting might end up going in this if all the dates align. But again, dates mean nothing in the world of whiskey, I have found. So we'll take what we can when we can, and we'll keep you updated about everything as it goes. What else do we have to update you on? Working on another Meet the Maker event for November, and we are working on a very interesting project with the nice people that are on the front of this box. Again, another project we're trying to get over the line before Christmas with you. Can't tell you what it is yet, but just know that our blender Eric is working on this. Eric Flynn is tasked with this project with 2 stacks. Again, everything's about timing, but just know that we're working on a lot this side of Christmas, and then we're already planning a lot the far side of Christmas as well. What else do you need to know? Irish Whiskey Experiences. Lauren's not here to give us an update, so I'll give you an update. We've got an almost sold out Belfast weekend coming up. I think we've got 2 places left maybe. And that's that's happening on November 3rd in Belfast. I'm excited for that. And then Whiskey Bus plans, March, of course, Whiskey Bus number 3. There's other Whiskey Buses in planning as well, and a few other experiences that we're putting together. So all things are moving on that side as well. So yeah, lots going on. So thanks for all your support. We'll be back on Wednesday night. Again, registration is available on storiezips.com. Register for the Zoom with Fionnán, private Zoom. Ask your questions. There'll be some great stories. But we're getting a lot of history this week from Fionnán, and we'll record that as well. But I'll send out another email reminder on Wednesday to get you to register. And again, if you haven't registered for your Teeling blind tasting kit, go ahead and do that. We've had more than 200 people register for those. And I think we'll close registration Monday or Tuesday. And looking forward to sharing the date with you for that. So yeah, Shinné, that's it, folks. Good long Shebeen, great entertaining guest in Fionnán O'Connor, and you can watch a replay of this tomorrow. And I think that's it. I think we've covered it all. Next week we'll be back with Lauren. Hit the like button if you haven't already, says Greg. Yeah, everybody, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button on YouTube, and if you haven't already subscribed on YouTube, it helps us. Just hit the subscribe button. And that's it. That's your cost of entry. All right, folks, thanks a million for joining us. Great time and great questions. Great hanging out with you all. Thanks for your support of Irish Whiskey and of Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. And hopefully some of you will be able to support Fionnán as well. Of course, there's lots of things that are vying for your time and your treasury. So only do what you can when you can. Don't get into any trouble financially over whiskey. It's only whiskey. So that's it, folks. I'll see you on Wednesday. Until then, enjoy the week, and we'll talk to you soon. Slán, everybody.